It was in the 90s I was talking about this, and since. About the plan was always for 3 world wars, and the Third World War was to pitch the West against Russia and China. There was no evidence at the time I started talking about it that this was happening in the public arena. Look at it now. And it's happening so fast. This is a guy called Albert Pike, massive high Freemason in America, helped to create the Ku Klux Klan. Nice man. He wrote a letter, it is said, in 1871 to another one of this Hidden Hands assets called Giuseppe Mazzini, in which he outlined 3 world wars. The First World War was accurately described. The Second World War was accurately described. However, news of this letter only came to light in the 1950s in a book written by a former Canadian naval intelligence officer. So forget about World War I and World War II. They can't be relevant when it's written in the 1950s. So what we've got to go on is the Third World War, in which Pike said it would come out of the Middle East and would create a conflict that would draw more and more countries in until it was a world conflict. He said something else. He said that in the run-up to this Third World War, they would unleash on the world what he called the nihilists. And nihilism is defined as a political belief or action that advocates or commits violence or terrorism without discernible constructive goals. In other words, ISIS and these American, British, Saudi Arabian funded rebels are classic nihilists. And now we are seeing more and more blatant where this is designed to go. A few months ago, the Pentagon suddenly listed Russia and China as top global threats and wanted a 4-fold boost in defense budget to meet the threat. This is World War III agenda made simple. Everything is Russia's fault. And now, yesterday, we have the grotesque sight of a war criminal, John Kerry, the Secretary of State in America, calling for a war crimes investigation against Russia and Assad. They have no shame. So now the State Department, I don't know if you saw this week, this guy called John Kirby, who's saying to Russia, if you keep supporting Assad, you're going to have terrorist attacks in Russian cities. You're going to have planes shot out the air. You're going to have Russian troops going home in body bags. That's not a prediction. It's a threat. NATO is reviewing nuclear playbook to deter terrible attacks by Russia. Pentagon chief. US prepared to fight in Russian and Chinese missile defense zones. Direct aggression by US against Damascus to cause tectonic shift in Middle East, says Moscow. Of course, and you know, I posted this picture of Assad on social media on my website in November 2014, saying that ISIS bombing, it's the real target is him. And now we're seeing it. And I too completely understand people's memories of the communist regime in this part of the world. But what they're trying to do is paint Putin as a new Stalin. This is how they're playing it, because then they can justify taking out a country run by the new Stalin. In fact, in this inverted world, I'm not saying Putin is God gift to the world, but compared with the American administration, compared with the British administration, compared with the NATO leadership, this guy's a freaking peacemaker by comparison to that lot. And we must not fall for it. Look at the facts, not the bloody propaganda. And he's now saying openly that the United States is planning World War III and 40 million Russians in emergency drills for possible nuclear, biological, chemical war events. He knows, it has known for a long time where this was going. And China, they're providing aid and enhanced military training in Syria, so they're getting pulled in. There's this dispute with America and others going on in the South China Sea, which was when I was in Australia recently. China and Russia, the whole drill in South China Sea, joint drill. And then China's warning against US deployment of the THAAD anti-missile system in South Korea. What they're doing is they want to put this anti-missile system into South Korea, the Americans. They say that's what they're going to do. Just as they want to do it in Europe, with that, where they want to put it in Poland. And people say, well, it's only a defense, missile defense system. No, it's not. Once you've got a defense system that can stop incoming missiles, you have first strike capability without any fear of what's coming back the other way. That's the whole idea of it. That's why they're doing it. China, US and South Korea will pay the price for military cooperation in the region. And then it's kicked off in India and Pakistan. This is all part of this chessboard that Brzezinski talked about, and the pieces are moving into place. And we've really got to understand what's going on, because they're selling this as it's all a system of a series of random events. It's not. It's been planned for so long. And she is the person who is chosen to come in and make sure it kicks off. Vote for me, I'll give you war with Russia and China. And he wants to shoot Iranian ships and a massive increase in the military. If he came in and do the same bloody thing. The other front against Russia is the Ukraine, after this United States instigated coup, again called a People's Revolution. Taking over Ukraine to start another front against Russia. And that coup, and the responsibility in the American State Department for Ukraine, comes under this lady's influence and control. Victoria Nuland, the Undersecretary of State for Eurasian Affairs in the State Department. Victoria Nuland is the wife of Robert Kagan, co-founder of the Project for the New American Century. It's all a scam. It was she who put Poroshenko in. WikiLeaks revelations show that he was an American agent long before he was chosen to be leader. Now they've said this week, the Americans, that they are legalizing delivery of lethal defensive weapons, attack weapons to Ukraine, which we were doing all along. So how do we stop wars? We stop Britain and America starting them. Engineered terrorism. We terrify you, and then we do what we want. You do what we want. So they have their problem, they have their reaction. Now watch them play out their pre-planned solution. Every time there's a terrorist attack, more elements of this police state and other aspects of the Hunger Games society are introduced, justified by the terrorism. CIA agent on terrorism, stories manufactured by the elite to keep us killing each other. US intelligence officer, every single terrorist attack in the US was a false flag attack, i.e. engineered by the government and the military. And it's nothing to do with protecting the public from terror attacks. What I say to these governments, if you want to protect these governments from these people from terrorist attacks, stop doing them. That's the end of it, then we can all get on with our lives. What this is about is using manufactured terrorism to justify the incessant build-up of this police-military state to protect us from terrorism. World Army police state. US military in 147 countries. I mentioned earlier on, the idea is to have a world government and then the world army to impose the will of the world government on anybody, anywhere in the world that wants to accept it. And what the American military is doing is being used to create this structure which eventually will be handed over to a world government. Pentagon announces worldwide expansion of military bases. This is all part of it. So what the American military has done, in its unbelievable arrogance, is to break the world up into comms or commands. We've got Northcom, that's the military control of North America in the police state, and these others, and EUCOM or EUCOM, and these others. Now, that is at the moment the structure of the American military. But what it really is the structure of the world army, which the American military is designed to eventually become, as we fuse the North Atlantic terrorist organization, NATO, with the European army they're now talking about, the UN peacekeeping operation, into one gigantic world army, actually world police army. They want the police and the army to do the same thing. And that's why we're seeing all over the world the police looking like the military, because the police and the military are designed to do the same thing eventually. So how do we get there? Globalization and centralization. If there's a few of you and you want to control the many, you have to centralize power of decision-making. The points of decision-making there are, the less power any cabal at the center can have over those decisions. So what we've seen is an incessant centralization of power in every area of our lives, and long, long ago they gave a name to it, globalization, which is merely this agenda I'm talking about unfolding. So they want us to see globalization as people coming together, but this is what it really is. It's handing power over the entire planet to a relative handful of people. And this is being done by what I call the totalitarian tiptoe. This is a stablemate, you might call it, of problem, reaction, solution. And it works like this. You're at A, and you know you're taking the world to Z. But you know if you go in two bigger steps, the change is so obvious, people go, what's going on? So you start at A, and you get there as fast as possible, but not so fast that a pattern becomes obvious for large numbers of people. And eventually you get down here and you look back and you say, my God, look how far we've come. Yeah, step by step by step. Each step promoted as unconnected to the other steps when they're fundamentally connected. Now, what they want to do is create a series of unions. The European Union is the furthest advanced, obviously. And also they want to break nation states up into regions controlled by the European Union or Union central bureaucracy. So you have the European Union, democracy in action, where more and more, this is why Britain got out, thanks to the majority of people having a brain, and they got out because of the amount of laws dictated by bureaucrats in Brussels. And this fascist communist EU, which is what it is, was planned from the start, right from the start. After the war, they could not have sold people what we have now. So they had to sell only a free trade area. Always good for jobs. Oh no, no centralization, just a free trade area. Right, okay. Well, this is a guy called Jean Monnet. He's known as the founding father of the EU project, a Rothschild frontman. This is what he wrote in a letter to a friend 64 years ago. Actually, the day after I was born. Europe's nations should be guided towards the superstate without their people understanding what is happening. This can be accomplished by successive steps, each disguised as having an economic purpose, but which will eventually and irreversibly lead to federation. And that's exactly what has happened. Now, fundamental to connected to the European Union is the centralization of power within corporations. Through what we call globalization. Corporations are taking over the world, and when you see the corporations and you see the controlling system, it's the same system, ultimately controlling all of them. This is a bit sobering in regard to that. The 100 biggest economies in the world, 51 are now corporations, and only 49 are countries. Of the top 200 corporations are bigger than 182 countries combined, and 147 corporations account for 40% of global trade. It's the Hunger Games society. And these trade treaties like TTIP and the Trans-Pacific Partnership and CETA between the EU and Canada are designed. And the idea of globalization is to make everywhere in the world dependent on the rest of the world, so they have no self-sufficiency within their borders where they can make their own decisions without being at the mercy of the global system. And in the Hunger Games movies and the Hunger Games book, America was broken up into regions with a capital, that's where the less than 1% lived, and all the different areas specialized in different things. And that's exactly what the European Union is doing, and that's exactly what they want globally. And this is why Dr. Richard Day said in 1969, the stated plan was that different parts of the world would be assigned different roles of industry and commerce in a unified global system. The continued preeminence of the United States and the relative independence and self-sufficiency of the United States would have to be changed. And he also said that the United States, in terms of industry and manufacturing, would be systematically run down and transferred abroad. Exactly what's happened. This is the story this week. America will have no manufacturing left at all. Ford moves more production to Mexico. Exactly what he said has happened. Now, this world of regions, breaking up nation states into regions, which is what they want. Now, there is a big resistance to that. And that resistance would be a sense of nation, a sense of history, a sense of culture, and a sense of being different. So what they want to do is to break up that sense of being different. They want a cocktail culture in Europe to break that down and break down that resistance to preserving the nation state. And that's what this is all about. What we're looking at are both the migrants coming in and the indigenous population being played like a violin by the same force, which couldn't care less about either. And it's all been long, long planned. If we see the world in black and white, them and us, bad guys and good guys, that's exactly how we're supposed to see it in the perception-deception. The truth is always in shades of grey. For instance, you know, my experience of Muslims, my personal experience of Muslims, is that they are some of the nicest, kindest, most generous people I've ever met. However, not all of them are. Some of them are deeply unpleasant, as we can see what's happening in Germany and Sweden and other places. But you can't have a shade of grey. You can't say, oh yeah, the vast majority are lovely people. But you can't say this, because the plan is to stop any resistance, because what needs to happen is this massive influx of people from the North Africa and the Middle East, according to this plan, has to continue incessantly. And you know, when you are bombing people out of their homes and out of their countries, of course people fleeing war need to be protected and helped. Of course, it's a natural human trait, a human reaction. But that's not what is happening only. In fact, the vast majority of people coming in are often young men who are pouring in for other reasons, because it's all a scam being played on the people of Europe emotionally. If you notice this horrific picture of this little boy on the beach in Turkey, who was drowned trying to flee to Greece, that picture, because I mean the way they mercilessly use children, that picture was like someone pressing a button. Suddenly this massive influx started almost on the back of that. And so much so that in Germany, people were on the platforms clapping the migrants coming in. Why? Because in the mind, in the perception-deception, every one of them was that little boy on the beach. But of course, since things have been seen to be shades of grey, not black and white. And these migrants coming into Europe are pawns in a much bigger and long-planned game that they don't know about, and much of the indigenous population doesn't know about and need to know about urgently. Dr. Richard Day, 1969. There would be mass movements and migrations of people without roots in their new locations, because traditions are easier to change in a place where there are a lot of transplanted people. as compared to trying to change traditions in a place where people grew up and had an extended family where they had roots. That's why it's happening, and it's systematic, and it's merciless on the migrants as well as anyone else. And what they want slaves fighting slaves for the slave owners. Give a man the banking system and he can control the world, which is what the Rothschilds do with others. All these things, IMF, European Central Bank, United States Federal Reserve, the World Bank, they're all controlled by the same web, working to the same agenda. One of the major reasons that 1% of the population globally now own nearly 50% of the world's wealth is this constant exchange of money that doesn't exist, called credit, in exchange for wealth that does exist. Homes, land, businesses, etc. This is how they've done it. I've lost my home. I couldn't pay back money that doesn't exist. That's the truth, staggeringly, of what is happening. It's a monumental confidence trick. And what they want to do is crush people financially, to push them, even people who are doing well financially now, if they're not part of the 1%, into that Hunger Games society, dependency society. Global warming, climate change. I'm going to go through this as quick as I can. And this is a major, major part of all this that people miss, based on fear. Oh, we're all going to die. Including campaigning for transformations of society because of global warming caused by humans. So, climate change. We'll start with the United Nations. United Nations is a stalking horse for world government on the totalitarian tiptoe. United Nations, world government. The Rockefeller family were fundamentally behind the creation of the League of Nations after the First World War, and also the United Nations after the Second World War, and that's the United Nations building in New York, which is actually built on land given free by the Rockefeller family. And then we come to these cusp organizations, and one of them is the Council on Foreign Relations. It was created in 1921 by J.D. Rockefeller and the Rockefeller dynasty. The Council on Foreign Relations, since 1921, has been one of the prime drivers of US foreign policy, including what's going on in the Middle East now. And J.D. Rockefeller founded the CFR. He funded it into being, he paid its ongoing expenses, and he provided this headquarters building, actually where I was a few weeks ago. Now, I tell you all that because at the United States delegation at the formation of the UN, it was described as a roll call of the Council on Foreign Relations. 74 members of the American delegation were from that organization. The United Nations was created by the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds as a stalking horse for world government. Now, that is relevant to global warming, the global warming hoax, because the climate change hoax is being perpetuated and sold to the world through the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And there's another thing played out through the United Nations. They're called Agenda 21 and Agenda 2030. And they are calling for a total transformation of global society in every facet of life. And they depend to justify that on the climate change hoax being true. All of it run through the United Nations. These are two quotes from UN climate officials. This is the first time in the history of mankind that we are setting ourselves the task of intentionally, within a defined period of time, to change the economic development model. We redistribute de facto the world's wealth by climate policy. It's nothing to do with climate, it's to do with changing society. Now, again, these cusp organizations, Club of Rome, created in 1968, specifically to use the environment as an excuse to transform global society. This is Aurelio Pecci, founder of the Club of Rome, quoted in one of their own documents in 1991. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, We came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine and the like would fit the bill. And that's exactly what they have done. And this is James Lovelock, this very week, godfather of the Green Movement, who said, having supported it all these years, climate change is bunk. And now, if you look at the Orwellian language, scientists who support climate change are scientists and climate experts. Those that expose the lie are skeptics and deniers. It's all Orwellian language. Doesn't matter, because global warming, or belief in global warming, is good to transform global society, and so is fracking, for reasons I'll come to. Number 10, Agenda 21-2030, which depends for its implementation on our belief in the official story of global warming, coming out down through the same United Nations. This is Agenda 21 that was accepted in 1992 at the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. And these are what it wants to happen according to its own documents. An end to national sovereignty, there we go. State planning and management of all land resources, ecosystems, deserts, forests, mountains, oceans and fresh water, agriculture, rural development, biotechnology and ensuring equity equals slavery. The state to define the role of business and financial resources. Abolition of private property, it's not sustainable. Restructuring the family unit, exactly, everyone it has that. Children raised by the state, exactly what Huxley said in Brave New World. People told what their job will be. Major restrictions on movement. Creation of human settlement zones, I'll come to them. Mass resettlement as people are forced to vacate land where they live. Dumbing down education, achieved. Mass global depopulation in pursuit of all the above. Accepted by the UN, all that. And then at the General Assembly in September last year, its updated version, Agenda 2030, was accepted and voted into being. What they do is they give you a series of things that they say they want to achieve. What they don't tell you is what they really mean. And what they give you are things you really can't argue with. So Agenda 2030 goals are no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, clean water and sanitation, sustainable cities and communities. Well, you can argue with that. Good idea, except that's not what it means. Agenda 2030 means the centralized global control of everything to save the planet. So let's take one, zero hunger. Who can complain about that? Well, that's not what it means. It means control of all global food production and distribution. In the beginning, I mentioned there were two purposes for everything. One, the ostensible purpose, and one, the real purpose. And the ostensible purpose here would be that growing your own vegetables was unsafe. It would spread disease or something like that. So the acceptable idea was to protect the consumer, but the real idea was to limit the food supply, and growing your own food would be illegal. And as Kissinger said, control oil and you control nations, control food and you control the people. That's what this is about. The worldwide destruction of the family farm. Wall Street's unprecedented land grab. They're forcing family farms to close, the corporations buy it up. And it seems inexplicable unless you realise it's part of this getting people off the land. And one of the ways they're doing it, too, is through manipulation of weather. If you look at this US Air Force document from 1996, it's openly talking about the artificial creation of floods, hurricanes, droughts, earthquakes, weather modification becoming part of domestic and international security, and the ability to generate precipitation, fog, storms on Earth, and modifying space weather as part of integrated. So when people are off the land, where do they go? Well, according to these documents, they go into human settlement zones, which are fantastically densely populated, dystopian centers of population, where people live in minute, what they call micro apartments. All this is straight off the pages of Agenda 2030, Agenda 21. And this month there's a UN meeting in Ecuador called Habitat the Third, and it again is pushing this new urban agenda, which is exactly what I'm talking about, these human settlement zones. And the idea is to get people in densely populated areas, very much high-rise apartments, and therefore they can be kept under surveillance 24/7, and the whole police state can easily control. Very easily. And some still do, because there are still the ability to live like that. But that is where they want to take it. That's where this Hunger Games society is going. That's why this world is what's unfolding around us. It's systematic. And how do we get there? Silence the population. This is where we have to be. Our perceptions have to be there for all of this to happen. If they weren't, it couldn't happen. Their worst nightmare, the worst nightmare of this cabal, this hidden hand, is that we expand our perception. Because when we do, we see it all. They can't scam us anymore.